life speaks. It speaks through struggles and success, through music and messages, the preconceived and the unexpected. Whether you are in the depths of the valley or in the midst of your mountaintop experience, everyone needs to be encouraged from time to time. Here we will share stories of strength, testimonies of triumph, verses of victory, observations, and information meant to touch the heart and uplift the soul, to keep you on your path of purpose and navigate this thing called life with power and authority. This is Andrea L. Hines, and I'm your host for When Life Speaks, here on ALH Broadcasting, an affiliate of the Streaming Inspirational Broadcast Network. I am glad you accepted the invitation to join us tonight. There's something in this broadcast just for you, and if it is going to be a blessing to your life, it will be to someone else as well. So share, tag, start a watch party, and invite someone you know to join us. Then turn down the volume of life and get ready to receive, so that when life speaks, you'll speak life. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to When Life Speaks. I tell you what, this is an exciting evening for me tonight. I've got a good friend and just a wonderful individual on as our guest tonight. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about him for those of you who don't know him. But I wanted to let you know that we are just embarking on a great time here at When Life Speaks. Good evening to you, Linda Cooks. Glad to have you on the line tonight. And if there is something that you want to share during the program, of course, you can put it in the comments section. If it's something that you want us to explore and get back to at a later time, be sure to reach out to us at whenlifespeaks@gmail.com. That's whenlifespeaks@gmail.com. Good evening to you, Ida Batts. Glad to have you on the line tonight. And I just want to say good evening to my guest, Mr. Warren Gene Hoskins.
Hello. What's going on, Elton?
Your whole name, your government name.
Boy, Gene Hoskins II. The whole government.
For those of you who don't know Gene at all, let me tell you, I know Gene first of all from his amazing gift as a psalmist, as a gospel singer, recording artist, and he's recorded with people like LaShawn Mitchell and Tasha Cobbs, John P. Key, Jonathan Nelson, to name a few. He has also had a solo project out called Undefeated. And most recently, he released his first solo album. What's the name of it, Gene?
It's called Homecoming.
Homecoming. It is called Homecoming. It's available on all major platforms. Is that right? All of them. And when it was released, you had a great achievement when it was released. Tell us.
It hit number 1 on iTunes for gospel Christian albums, and then it hit number 32 across the U in all genres. So that was rap, that was country, hip hop, R&B, all that.
Amazing. Oh, yes. That is great. We congratulate you on that. But that's not all to Gene. I mean, we know him as being just amazing in music, but he also is a mental health care professional.
Yes.
And he got his degree in psychology and sociology at UNC Chapel Hill, completed his master's degree in clinical psychology at North Carolina Central University, and is now practicing, of course, as a clinical psychologist. And Gene, I I wanted you to be on with us tonight, particularly because those of you who are part of our listening audience know that we have a group of faithful folk that we call our village, and they weigh in on different topics from week to week. And we just finished discussing last week how to handle the pain of the past. What do you do so that past pain does not become toxic baggage? And you and I had a conversation recently where we were talking about brokenness. You know, sometimes people are broken from different situations, different scenarios, and they think that they are healed. How many times, listeners, have you been somewhere, something happened, and you tell somebody about it, and the first thing you say is, "Oh, but I'm over it. I'm over it. I'm done with that. You know, I got that under control." And then something will happen and trigger, and you find yourself in a pool of tears, wondering what in the world happened. You know, how did I get to this place? And the village weighed in with a lot of things about handling the pain of the past. And they talked about forgiveness was one of the things that came through. Learning the lesson was another thing that came through. Being able to journal to help you out of it. Just different things that they thought were important. But I wanted to have a mental health care professional on because the other thing that came through was healing. And I realized that a lot of times we don't get over things and we can't get past things because we really haven't healed.
Absolutely.
That's what I want you to talk to us about tonight, Gene. Talk to us about this animal called healing, what it is, what we need it to be, how we embrace it, and some of the things that we need to do to stay healed and healthy.
Right. So I'm gonna work backwards. You said something super important. So I'm in the process, I told you, of writing a book. And one of the sections of the book is entitled Healing. So I'm gonna say this: in the process of being whole, becoming whole, which is a process of healing, is a journey. Again, healing is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. Typically, if I was to, crack a piggy bank and I tried to put it back together with glue, it's going to take me a while, right? It's not something that just magically happens. But in the process of pursuing healing, it is super important not to add things that will break you again, right? And so a lot of times, sometimes we have a cycle, or we have a history of being attracted to the same things that broke us before. And so when we realize that the need for healing exists, it's super important that we're not drawn to those things and we add those things that will break us down again. So that's number one. So that's how do you stay healed? Identify the cycles, identify the things you're attracted to that broke you in the beginning, but that you kind of have an attraction to that has a affinity to break you again. So again, how can I say that, Brother Gene? In the process of healing, stop adding things that could break you. Right? There's no need of wasting energy if we're gonna go back to the same cycles. Identify the cycles that may have contributed to what happened. In the process of healing, there has to be a necessary confrontation about the need to pursue wholeness. There are some people who are broken and don't realize it. When you become complacent and all you know is life dysfunctionally. And so what happens is I tell people, how do you know you're dysfunctional? So the idea of function is, the word function means something working for you. It works for you when you need it to work, in the time you need to work, in the season you need it to work. Something becomes dysfunctional when you try to make something work that no longer serves its purpose, right? For example, I can give you a clinical explanation. I've been doing mental health for 12 years. And I'm if we can be really honest and vulnerable, I'm kind of give you an example. I had a client years ago who experienced sexual abuse, very, very brutal sexual abuse. And the effort to protect herself, shut down being sexual with anybody after that experience, right? It was functional for her in the process of healing to shut down, to protect herself. Now we go years later, she's in a marriage and she's still shut down sexually. It was functional for her to protect herself in that season where she was being abused.
Right.
It's no longer functional in your marriage, right? So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us are operating dysfunctional behaviors. That behavior helped you. It soothed you. It kind of held you together when you needed to do when you needed it to. Excuse me. But now we're in the season where some things no longer serve you. So what things are you operating in? What behaviors are you carrying into
Right.
space
Right.
that no longer serve you?
Mm.
If we're carrying around a whole bunch of dysfunctional behavior, let's figure out why we're carrying it from, why we're carrying it, where did it originate from, and let's start doing it. That's the genesis. Like, this is why I started this behavior, and this is what I need to address. So, number one, we would start at the end. The end is stop adding things that could break you while you're healing. B is there's a necessary confrontation that healing has to happen. In that confrontation, there is a necessary confrontation. We have to address cycles. And so that's kind of the beginning and the end. I guess I can continue going on unless you had any more questions about anything I said or anybody else had any questions, because I know we're kind of having a discussion right now.
Mm-hmm. If anybody has anything that they want to ask Jean, feel free to put it in the comment section because we can see your comments this evening. But I want to ask you something. You were talking about confronting, having that confrontation that healing needs to occur. I know we often say that you can't conquer what you can't confront. And you said something very, very interesting when you were saying that there are some times that you are broken and that you need healing and that you don't even recognize that you do. How do I recognize it? What is it is it in something that somebody says? Is it in the things that I do in my journey? What is it that lets me know, something, this is bigger than me. I can't handle this the way that I usually do because I'm going back into those behaviors that you just told me to stay out of. So what helps me in that process to know that I need to confront and conquer?
There are different things, and I mean, it's so broad. But what I want to reveal to people is one thing we tend to do when we've been hurt, we've been traumatized. In an effort to protect our emotions and ourselves, we tend to withdraw and become stoic. Right? There's some things that have hurt us so badly, and we said, in order for me not to experience this again, I just shut my emotions off. And so I tell people, how are you responding to things, right? How are you responding to things that deserve an emotional response? If your response is off, why is it off, right? Let's determine why your response is off. Because, okay, if somebody died, if something traumatic happened, and your response is, okay, well, that happens to everybody. Let's look at your responses. If your responses are off, that's an indication. Number two, I don't care how you try to front. I don't care what you say out of your mouth, how you pretend. There will always be a trigger that will let you know, whether it's in speech, someone says, sometimes it's in how someone sounds that reminds you of someone. Sometimes it's in smells. There's a trigger that will always remind you that there's some healing that has to take place. And so, those are typically signs. I tell people, how am I responding to things that deserve a response, a congruent response, right? And B, like, you know what I'm saying? What are the triggers? Like, what's triggering me? Is it the thing that's triggering me? Like, why is it certain people's voice type that triggers me? Why is it certain smells that cause me to go off the rail? Once I identify the patterns of my trigger, that usually is indicative that their healing has to take place. Something related to those triggers. So I tell people, pay attention to your signs, right? A lot of us are going through life and we're not paying attention to the signs of how we're living and our quality of life. And so those typically are indicators that healing has to happen.
Now I know that for me, I had an episode. I won't call it an episode, but I had an incident happen where someone said something to me, and it took me back to a painful place in my childhood. And I was really, I was really surprised because I thought, where is this coming from? Why is this coming now?
Mm-hmm.
And what was it really that the individual said?
Mm-hmm.
And I really had to examine all of that to realize and recognize I'm not over this thing.
Can I say something? The
Sure.
reason a lot of times, and it's going to answer Miss Bernice. I'm answer your question. This kind of speaks to you as well, Elder. And then I had a very similar experience. She says, "Can the trauma be so horrific that it's erased from your memory?" I'm not going to say erased, but it's hidden. Again, we as human beings, we believe in self-preservation. I don't care what anyone says. We believe in self-preservation.
Right.
Anytime we see something as dangerous physically, we have fight or flight. But also, when we find things emotionally dangerous, we tend to reclude. We tend to shut down as well. There are some times that abuse is so horrific that our brain seeks to. I don't know if you ever heard something called they call it it used to be called multiple personality disorders.
Right.
Now we call it dissociative identity disorders. And what it says is that people have different personalities, but it's called alters. And what happens is someone can have a trauma so severe that in order to protect their psyche, the brain splits to create other alters. Right. And so that's where that comes from. And so a trauma can be so horrific, our brain responds by splitting to create different personalities. A. B. We also, with something called, we suppress and we repress memories that are too painful. And what happens, Elder Hines, it appears that maybe you had a memory that was maybe painful, and you kind of suppressed it. And there was something that was reminiscent of that trauma.
Right.
That brought it back, right? And so we can only hide it. We can only repress it for so long before it tries to break through. It's just how it works. I don't know anyone that was able to repress anything so long. And even in this repressed state, you may see behaviors that speak to that repressed memory. You may see it in nightmares and night terrors, right? But that thing is, and again, I'm putting this in my book, as human beings, we seek to have resolution. And there's resolution from conflict, there's resolution from trauma. And so it's important. It's not just, that's like me, Dr. Hines, going to my kitchen right now, sweeping everything on the rug. I can do that in the heights. But after a while, it's going to carry a stench. It's going to be a pile, and I have to deal with it.
Yes.
And so a lot of us are repressing things that we need to start. And so that happens by addressing healing through the process of therapy and insight and prayer and your community and mentors. And Linda Cook said, how long should someone be in a functional protective mode before it becomes dysfunctional? Is there a time frame? Absolutely not. It becomes dysfunctional when the behavior no longer serves you. All right. So, for example, this might not be a good example because I still kind of wear sometimes jean jackets in the summer. But if I were to wear a bubble coat in the wintertime, is that a functional piece of clothing for winter? I mean, for summer? It's not. Right? Because sometimes, spring may have a cold day, right? And I could throw on a heavy jacket because that piece of clothing is functional, right? You can't really look at time frame, just look at when this behavior is appropriate, if it serves me any longer. I mean, if it doesn't, it's dysfunctional.
Now, let me ask you something about needing help.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we can, at least we think we can, handle things on our own in terms of putting into place some of the things that you talked about tonight. But sometimes we need help with those things. We need therapy. We need to see a clinical psychologist. We need that help. And it is becomes especially difficult sometimes in the church. Because we are led to believe, girl, you're not praying right. You got to seek God. You just stay on your face. You'll be okay. This thing's going to work itself out. God's got you and all of those things. But no, sometimes we need the help and guidance of a professional. How do we know when we've reached that point? Is it as and I don't want to say simple, but is it the same thing as that recognition of the bubble coat in the summertime, when it's no longer functional, when you're just at that place where you cannot handle it anymore?
I'm telling you this. Look at your quality of life. It will always reveal what needs to heal. Look at your quality of life. It will always reveal what needs to heal. You will see it in your relationship. You will see it in your work ethic. You will see it in how you respond emotionally or don't respond. And I'm gonna tell you this. This is something I had to learn too, and I'm gonna be pretty transparent. I thought I was healed from something that occurred to me in childhood, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm good. I don't feel that emotion anymore. I don't feel, you know, broken or hurt anymore." And I remember I was like, "Oh God, I could, because for a long time I was super emotionally stoic. I didn't really say I love you only to my family. I didn't really hug. I wasn't a toucher, affectionate, and I saw the removal of affection as me being whole, which was not an appropriate litmus test. And I remember saying, "Oh God, I'm healed. Thank you for bringing me through that trauma that broke me." And I remember the Holy Spirit saying to me, "Just because it's quiet does not mean it's dead."
Yeah.
Ooh,
boy.
Yeah, and I had got to the point where I was ignoring the noise from the broken place. Mm. We can get so accustomed to living dysfunctionally into the noise that it doesn't bother us anymore. We don't hear the noise; those people around us hear it, and how we act, right? And so the Holy Spirit said, address it, cut the head off of it, then pronounce your whole.
Yeah.
And so as I began to do the work, I began to write songs. I wrote a song called "Deal" on my album that deals with that. And one thing I learned, and this is in my book, that on a journey to healing, Elder Hines, there are indicators that let us know that we are being healed. Again, as I mentioned before, that a lot of times when we experience a place of brokenness or trauma or just some extreme hurt, we tend to remove our emotions and shut down because we cannot afford to feel it again. Well, an indicator healing is that we're feeling again. I remember I was watching something on TV, and I don't consider myself super emotional, but as I'm getting older, I was like, tears in my eyes, I was crying. I was like, now wait a minute, you don't do that. Like, I'm gonna tell my mom, say, not to, I'm getting older, or like you still crying at the TV show. And the Holy Ghost say, you're feeling again. I said, oh my gosh, I'm on a journey to healing because I'm allowing myself to feel again. And so I tell people, the litmus test, you get the indicator that you're being healed, that you're healing. Are you feeling again?
Yeah. Now, Victoria has a question that came through, and it's in line with something that I've been talking about all, Victoria. How do you support someone who needs help but won't get it?
Yeah, I get this question probably once a week. And I tell people the best way to support someone that needs it but don't want to get it is you have to show them how the quality of life has been diminished because of the dysfunction. And so you have to say, well, have you noticed such and such, such and such? Have you noticed, like, you haven't been paying your bills? Have you noticed you're not beginning to bed? Have you noticed that, you're not, like, I think we've noticed that. Have you noticed it? Like, I'm concerned about you because from what I remember and what's happening, there's a stark contrast and there's a decompensation in your behavior and what we're seeing. And that as your support system is concerning to me. And so a lot of times you can't be them on here talking about, you need to go, we care about you. Show them how their life has changed. Because sometimes they don't see it, right? When you're in it, sometimes you can't see it. But sometimes you'll say from the outside looking in, have you noticed this? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed how people responded to you? I think we need to consider getting some outside help because I don't like this person. Well, don't use that word. I don't like what I'm seeing, and I'm concerned, right? Because you don't want to sound like that person because we don't know, that has a whole different meaning. I don't like what I'm seeing, and I believe this warrants some outside help. So show them how their life has changed, and that's a way.
Mm-hmm. And when you say that, I think that when it is someone close to us, it is also important to understand that you cannot always be the answer.
Oh, no. And I
You
think,
know, one of the things we need to do is to understand that it is okay to ask certain questions, like you were saying. You know, that have you noticed that?
yeah,
Because this is what I'm noticing, and to help them to understand, or help us to understand that there is help, and then there's the right help.
yeah, because keep in mind, to be honest, most of the time, if you're really, really close to them, you're too close to them for them to kind of receive.
Right.
Um, and so one way you just say, hey, because they might be like, well, you saying it because da da da, but you saying this because it is your investment. But if you give them facts, like, no, this is a fact. I know we're close, but this is the fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you can't dispute facts. I don't care how mad you are. You can't continue to show. They're probably going to be combative. They're probably going to like refuse it, but you have responsibility. Hey, your life has changed. And I don't know if you told me some of your goals for the future, and what I'm saying now is not going to get you there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do we find now that there are more and I might kind of take you off because I didn't tell you that I was going to ask along
Mhm.
this line, but are numbers increasing, or have they increased since the pandemic in particular, when it comes to needing to heal those broken places? I mean, do you find that more young people, I'm speaking of now, that more young people are in traumatic or broken places?
The pandemic and mental health has been really, really interesting. We're prepared. We have a saying, me and some of my colleagues, that after the pandemic of corona is going to be the second pandemic of mental health, because we're going to be dealing with the aftermath of what we saw, experienced, went through. Absolutely. We've seen an increase in substance abuse. We've seen an increase in physical abuse, because now a lot of people are in the places or in the same spaces as those people who abuse. What the abusers just go to work, right? Well, they
Mm-hmm.
weren't going to work; they would stay at home, right? So we saw an increase in a lot of that. Another thing the pandemic's done for us, it made mental health not as taboo. Because we realized that we all together was going through something traumatic, and we all together need to talk to someone. And so there's been an influx of people who are coming to us just to talk about life, and then talking about life with going to those previous experiences. Being at home and not working for a while for a lot of people allowed them to kind of, go over their life and kind of where they are now, and, introspection, and that'll kind of propel people to go to therapy as well. And so, yeah, there has been more people, coming. I'm not sure if it's a matter of, them being hurt in the pandemic, or the pandemic revealing what was already there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me something else, Jean. What is the clear difference between um, the need for a therapist, or a counselor, or a clinical psychologist, or is there differentiation in those areas?
Um, Go to either one, and we all just have different things we can do. And so, as me in the psychology, we do a lot of testing as well. So we do therapy, but we also do testing. So we do a lot of diagnosing, because for some diagnoses it requires testing. ADHD, bipolar requires certain battery of tests. So
Mm-hmm.
we can do that. But just for basic therapy, you go to either one. We just kind of do a little more because of our training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about how anger and unforgiveness can play into those broken places.
Man. I think anger a lot of times is a byproduct of. So let's be, and I talk on this all the time. Anger is something, we have something called primary emotions and secondary emotions. Primary emotions are the emotions you first feel when something happens. Secondary emotion is the thing that arises from the primary emotion. I'm from the school of thought that anger is never really the primary emotion; it's always the one that arises. If we were in a school cafeteria, Elder, and somebody came in front of everybody and knocked my tray over, what's the first emotion I will feel?
Tell me.
Somebody, what do you think? Anybody in the comments, if somebody came and knocked my tray over in front of me, what's the first emotion I will feel? I want to see this. I want to see what you think. Anybody, type it in. And be absolutely embarrassed. I will always, anger will be the second one, right? I will feel embarrassed. And out of embarrassment will come the anger because I'm embarrassed. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Anger is, and I'm from the school of thought, I don't believe anger is the first one you feel. It's always one that arises, shock. It's always one that arises out of that, right? Mm-hmm. So the way anger plays into it, I believe a lot of times people are angry because there's an underlying emotion they have to deal with. They probably don't even have the words for it, the language for it, or the insight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so imagine, having some kind of tragic abuse happen to you. You're younger and you feel guilty and you feel upset and shame, and you try to bury that. And out of that shame and embarrassment, the fact you have to feel that anger about life just sprouts out of that. Anger about men or women sprouts out of that. I believe anger plays a big part. And so sometimes you have to ask people, why are you so angry? Like, when did this start? Well, this started then. Okay, this started at this moment. What are you really feeling? Is it shame? Is it embarrassment? Is it guilt? Well, let's target those root emotions so the anger would dissipate.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's very helpful, Gene, because I'm not sure that we look at those things in terms of primary and secondary emotions.
And most people want, this is something we know, but I feel like it's super helpful because I believe that a lot of people don't have emotional intelligence. Like, we only know anger, happiness, sadness, guilt. But there's complex emotions, and there's interplay, and there's sometimes you can experience two things at one time, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's not a lot of emotional literacy out here, intelligence. What caused the absolute schizophrenia? What's the root? What's the root cause? Once you get that root, everything else goes away. But there's a lot of people walking around angry, but you're angry, and I get why you're angry, but underneath, it's like an iceberg, right? We see something, like something else underneath, and that's what's underneath. Because that thing underneath is what's going to sink your ship.
Absolutely. Broken. We can get by. Wow. And I think that's what we do. I think we get by on broken pieces.
On broken pieces.
We have found a way and figured out a way to keep going. And go ahead.
Elder, because my thing is, a lot of us get by on broken pieces, but I refuse to look over to my right and see a whole ship. Like, that's accessible to me as well. And so my thing is, if I'm on broken pieces and I see the Disney cruise ship go by, I need to figure out how I can get that ship. It's available to me, right? Mm-hmm. And so my thing is, again, you have to realize that although I'm going forward, is it productive? Am I doing it how I'm supposed to do it? And you have to be honest with yourself. If I'm getting by on broken pieces, there's more for me. What do I need to do to make sure I can put that ship?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you had to give us 3 things that you consider the most valuable things in leading us to a whole and healthy, because I think those two go hand in hand, a whole and healthy life.
Absolutely.
What would they be?
Okay. Well, you just hit it right on the head. The definition for healing is the process to sound and whole. The process to sound and whole, right? If we're broken, it's not making sound. It's together it makes sound. One thing I would say again, I mentioned it earlier, in the process of healing, you have to watch your surroundings and don't add things that could break you down, right? And I'm not trying to get so specific, but if I keep adding things that break you while I'm healing, soon enough, that's going to reinforce the fact that I don't deserve to be whole. And that brokenness is all I would know.
Mm-hmm. And
so I tell people, don't add things that will break you. Number one, being honest about the need for it. And like I said, this is identifying the triggers, the language, the words, the smells. Different things on TV can trigger you. And so looking for the patterns, looking for the patterns of the things that indicate that healing has to take place. And this is another one I think is important. If I don't have the strength to it alone, identifying those natural supports or those people I can trust. Is it I know some of y'all are really close to Elder Hines. Is it an Elder Hines I can confide in? Is it a therapist? Is it my pastor who not only can offer sound religious perspective, but also practical? It's not too religious, right? I feel like some things we just make. I'm saved, sanctified. There's some things that are more practical than we make. We don't, we don't make it. Whatever. So identifying people or those community supports, those natural supports that can aid in your healing. Identifying those who are reinforcing your brokenness. Some people benefit from you being broken.
Yeah, that's good.
Some people benefit from you being not healed, right? And so identifying those relationships that no longer serve you, that's super important. Because I gave 4, but those are the ones I would say.
And I want to say something about a comment that Bernice made here when she said, use coping mechanisms to cope.
Good ones.
Coping mechanisms. And I think that sometimes, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with the coping mechanism and just that word cope, that it is sometimes a temporary situation.
I was going to say coping helps us
it's until like what's under the rug.
Right. Again, coping is putting a rag putting a rug on the trash. Right. It's good. Again, a coping mechanism, right? And I mentioned it earlier, was when something traumatic happens, me repressing it. Repression is a coping mechanism. It helps me to deal with it, right? Think of coping. It helps me to deal with what happened to me.
Right.
Displacement, pushing my anger or something else on someone else, right? It helps me to cope with what I'm feeling. But is it something that helps me to get to, is it something that's beneficial to healing? I mean, I can use it on my process to healing, but it does not mean I'm healed. It's just indicative that I needed something to help me do the process.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing there too, is coping, and all of those things are part of the journey. They're just a part of the journey.
And it's not your crutch.
Not all of it.
Guess what? Again, I'm going to say it again. If I keep using coping strategies that no longer serve me, what is it?
Yeah.
Is dysfunctional.
Yeah. I tell you what, Gene, this has been so helpful tonight. I'm so glad that our listeners were able to come on. We do a replay of this program at noon on Saturdays. So for those people who were not able to make it tonight, if you know of someone that you think would be helped by the information that Gene shared with us and his insight as a clinical psychologist, please have them listen to that rebroadcast, because it's just, these are things we need to know. These are things that help us in that journey and help us along the way. Gene, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, anyway, these are things we need to know, and these are things that kids need to know. It's time to, a lot of us are reproducing dysfunction and stuff, and so I think it's super important that once you give it to your kids and grandkids, so they won't have some of the same trials and roads you had to go. You can email me any questions at warrenhoskinsi@gmail.com. Or I'm pretty active on social media and I talk to everyone. I mean, I have quite a bit of followers, but I like to talk to people. I am Gene Hoskins on Instagram. And then on Facebook, Gene Hoskins. And then my company website is www.pompsderm.com. Pompsderm.com. Peace of Mind Psychological Services, located here in Durham, North Carolina. But we serve everybody. But I really, really love serving my minorities and my minority men. It's been a blessing. So thank you, Elder, for having me again. It's an honor to be invited back, right?
Look, this is not the last you have heard from me, Gene, and this is not the last that you will see Gene Hoskins, because when your book comes up, when it is published, we're going to have you back on When Life Speaks, and we're also going to have you on Authors Up, because we're going to put you everywhere that we can, because I know there's going to be some good stuff in there that we all want to
Can
know.
I share the title? Can I share the title?
Yes, absolutely.
So the title of my book, y'all got to buy it when it's coming out soon. It's called It's called Nuggets for Your Journey, Not the Ones You Eat. Nuggets for your journey, not the ones you eat.
You guys put that down. Write that down somewhere. You're not going to want to forget that name. I tell you what.
I'm super
Jean, again, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Is there any closing comment that you have that you want to leave our listeners with? I know that you say that there are favorite mantras and things that you have. Is there one you'd like to leave with us tonight?
Yeah, I'll leave my personal one that's for me, and one that's actually the mantra for my business. Whole thoughts, whole mind, whole person. Whole thoughts, whole mind, whole person.
All right. Whole thoughts, whole mind, whole person.
When I get my thoughts together, I can get my mind together. I get my whole being together.
All right. Amen. This has just been wonderful. Thank you again. Thank you again for being with us. Listeners, you know what to do. You know how to get in touch with Jean. You know how to get in touch with me. If there are any other topics that you would like for us to explore, please let me know. Send me an email to speaklifewithandrea@gmail.com. That's speaklifewithandrea@gmail.com. So that is it for us for tonight. Thank you, Jean. And I'll be right back here next week at 7 p.m. so that we can turn down the volume of life for just a little bit, because when life speaks, you'll speak life. Good night, everybody.
Goodbye, y'all. Goodbye. Thank you, Elder.
Thank you, Jean.